Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So today on the show we have Tatjana Mesar. Dobar dan.
Dobar dan. Hello.
If my creation is right. I could try my German as well. I appreciate you're in Berlin today. Is that right?
Actually in Potsdam, but it's close.
Not so far. So to introduce Tatjana, she has been studying yoga and Buddhism for almost 2 decades, teaching since 2007. She's done 3-year shiatsu practitioner. She's got a master's degree in music, and she's played flute at some pretty highbrow classical levels in Berlin. She's writing, massaging, lots on mindfulness, strong background in Zen teacher training, strong background in yoga, Buddhism of various kinds. I'm looking at her CV on her website now. It's really as long as my arm. There's all sorts of things there, but I'm sure that will come out in the conversation. So welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for inviting me.
So how did you get interested in the body?
I was in pain. The body was in pain, so I had to start doing something because growing up, I was not interested in the body, and it wasn't encouraged to be interested in the body. It was all about books and feeling the mind. And then somewhere around age 23 and 24, the pain was like, wow, it wasn't comfortable anymore, and I had to start looking into the body as well.
It's interesting. I've heard this story a few times on different people we've had on. Some of them have, started off basically something was dysfunctional, something hurt, something didn't work, and then they got interested in this area which isn't really culturally supported.
Yeah, in my case, since I was studying flute and playing classical flute since I was 8, with not so good posture at the beginning, so this misalignment got really deep into my structure. That was physical pain caused by playing flute, and then other sorts of confusions that were also causing pain.
So you grew up in Croatia?
Yes.
Anywhere I might know?
I was born in Zagreb. I don't know if you've been to Zagreb. Yeah, that's usually the destination to land in Croatia. And then I grew up in a small town near Zagreb, and I also lived on the coast in Pula, in Istria. Okay.
Well, you're someone I've only known through Facebook. So, some guests I've known really well, but this is genuinely exploratory today. Other than looking at your website and a few Facebook conversations, it's going to be good to get to know you and your work. So you've ended up, so you started with music, and I find many musicians, because they practice so much, if there's a slight thing with their posture, it can become quite a big thing quite quickly.
Yeah, every musical instrument has its kind of like dark side, because you have to, flute is asymmetrical, same like violin, and especially if you haven't learned from the beginning as a kid how to hold an instrument well. And back then when I started, this wasn't really a topic in my music school. Then it gets deep, and the shoulders, left shoulder, right shoulder is kind of like,
because you're leaning off to one side, or I look at violinists or celloists, and I think, God, how do you do that all day? I've also seen body workers change people's posture, and then the sound they're making from their instrument transform.
Definitely, because body is a medium for the sound, and if your body is kind of innerly tense and closed, that reflects in the sound of the instrument. And on the other hand, playing an instrument is kind of like playing the body as well. I can put it that way.
Interesting. Say more about that. What do you mean by that? Playing the body, playing an instrument?
Well, I think every musician knows that feeling that when you're in tune with your instrument, then the sound resonates through you. Flute resonates one way. When you play double bass, you're resonating together with the bass, the piano player. I think that's that magic that gets you going and practicing. As a kid, it's kind of like you're in love with that feeling of playing.
Okay, so please excuse my ignorance here. Like, music is perhaps my weakest area of all the ways in which a human being can be educated. My chanting is so bad, so atonal that Zen teachers have actually stopped me chanting in the middle of retreats. And I don't think anyone's tone deaf, but I'm certainly not my area of specialism. So if I ask you dumb questions about music, that's why. So it's like the whole body is resonating with the musical instrument, and there's I'm guessing a very physiological effect on spending hours and hours a day having certain notes go through you.
Well, first of all, flute is a wind instrument, so you're blowing it, so it has to have that like connection of you producing the sound through blowing the air into the tube. And my flute teacher used to say that playing the flute is sculpturing the sound or sculpturing the air. So it's all very physical what you do. And fingers and you have to develop very high level of sensitivity in the fingers, and also connection of mind and hands.
And breath is so central to many of the mind-body disciplines that you've come to be expert in. It's interesting. You started off with a kind of wind instrument, and now you sit and you're teaching a Zen retreat, perhaps, where you're noticing your breath go in and out.
Definitely. And I mean, there's also this connection of flute or breath, wind instruments in mythology. Like Krishna was playing the flute, and then you have also Pan playing the flute. So there's something, I think I see it as a connection of the body and the sound and the art expressed also in some other cultures.
Okay, so you're currently in Germany and you're teaching, established yoga meditation teacher there. You've been in the United States, right?
Yeah, I've been in New York for.
And do I understand that you also grew up during the kind of dissolution of the former Yugoslavia?
Yeah, I was 16 years old when the war started, and I lived with my parents in Croatia back then.
Wow, so it's a pretty impressionable age.
It's sensitive age because it's time when you're supposed to develop, when you should dream about the future and develop like visions of the future, and then suddenly the reality is so dark and fucked up.
Yeah, and I hope you don't mind me asking about this. Feel free to sort of, talk. I know you mentioned this on our mails previously, so I'm hoping it's okay. Imagining but feel free not to if you don't want to. I was imagining there's a traumatic impact there.
Yeah, but I wasn't aware that it was traumatic. Maybe it took me maybe 20 years to start the effect, because back then you have to survive. And in my hometown, it wasn't as bad as in some other parts of Croatia.
Yeah.
Talking to my friends, we all thought like, well, we didn't get it so hard, we shouldn't complain.
Yeah.
But it was bad. And when you're 16, your survival techniques is I listened to David Bowie's records and danced at home like crazy. And then you would go to shelter because there is announcement of general air danger. Or they would be screaming. Back then it was the time of Twin Peaks. So we would be watching Twin Peaks. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
This dark.
David Lynch.
Yeah. And this would be like a distraction from the reality. Like
So you are hiding in air shelters. Obviously, in that conflict, there was a lot of sexual violence, within communities. I went to the museum in Dubrovnik when I was there. I did some work out there and kind of had it there. And I've had a few clients from there. I've had Serbian friends. And it's a pretty terrible thing in European history. Very close. I remember it was quite strange growing up. There was something in Europe, just across the water from Italy, happening. We sort of imagined things like that would only happen in Africa or South America or somewhere. Then all of a sudden, there it was in Europe.
Yeah, it was in Europe, and it lasted a long time.
Yeah.
Slowly bleeding. Yeah. Well, what was your question, or it was just?
How has this influenced you as someone who works with the body today?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking about it now before this conversation. I think there is a value of disembodiment in these situations. It definitely, you just go out. And in my case, I would go into music or reading. I also remember in that worst war year, I dived into reading Proust. So I was just like Marcel Proust. It's like 1,000 and something pages, and I would go there and not be where I am.
Forget about your emotions, forget about the anxiety or the fear in your body, and just go to this music or this literature.
You have to lock that out somehow. And also, if you're in a shelter with other people, like with your family, with your neighbors, you have to stay tough, because if one person falls apart, then everyone could fall apart. At least that was my feeling. Like
you can't lose it. That was the fear there.
Yeah. And being 16, I had innerly, it was my attitude was, I'm going to have fun no matter what. So we also did some parties, and we were kids running into our favorite bar that was in the basement. So it was kind of a convenient place to go during the airstrikes, and then you would.
Excellent. So there was a bar in the air raid shelter. That's quite a combination. I've done some humanitarian work, and I know some humanitarian aid workers who'd be very fond of a situation like that.
Yeah, you become resourceful.
Interesting. Okay, and what got you interested in meditation, yoga? How did that start? From the flute player to the teenager in Yugoslavia. What happened next?
I got my first yoga book when I was maybe 16, 17. I was curious. I grew up in an atheistic family and atheistic society, and part of me still holds up to some those values, like being very skeptical about. But the reality was what I was seeing around myself. Made me question everything, and I was looking for some kind of answers.
So you were skeptical, you were questioning, and then what was your first exposure?
Well, I think for me, the big question, and it's maybe still my big question, growing up during the war, I was wondering if this is really how people are. If nature is in its essence evil, what the church says or what the Freud says, I think I wouldn't be able to really survive. Like if this is who we are. So I was looking for something else that would explain what's going on. And I got my first yoga book when I was 16, 17, but the poses, like the asanas in the yoga book, were so complicated that back then for me it was like, no way. I mean, I can't do any of that. But I was reading about meditation, and I was attracted to it. But even as a kid, I remember 3 or 4 years old, I would have my own private exercises of stopping the thoughts, which meant like stopping your breath and trying to somehow, I don't know, change the state of mind, or stopping the time. So I think I was curious about these other states. And then I started doing yoga when I was in university, first year. But that group of people were really spaced out. So after 1 year, I kind of drifted away because, I think they were just too weird for me.
So you were attracted to it. You thought, okay, there's got to be something else in human nature other than this kind of dark side of things perhaps you'd seen. But then you weren't into the sort of spacey hippies either, by the sound of things.
No. So I did it for 1 year, and then I stopped and I went to party.
Okay, you weren't quite ready for it maybe as well. I had that experience when I was younger.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, maybe, but let's first experience something else. And then I was partying for a couple of years. I also went to London for 1 year and had some good parties there. And then I came back to Croatia, and it was time to start dealing with things, with physical pain, with confusion in the head. And I found one book, which was Snow Leopard. It's a travel book about a journey to Tibet.
Yeah.
And I think that book I was traveling together with the author, and the interest in Buddhism was born with that book.
Okay, so that sparked that interest. Was this before New York or?
That was before, long before.
Before New York. Okay, so you originally got interested in this stuff while you're still in Croatia.
Yeah, when I came back from London and working in Croatia.
And I imagine there wasn't a huge amount of sort of yoga and meditation and things around then. I know there is now, but
back then there was a group of people who practiced yoga and martial arts and Buddhism back since 70s, and they founded the first vegetarian society and the Buddhist center, and they were practicing Kempo.
Yeah.
With the British guy who was the main teacher. And since Yugoslavian people could travel, we weren't isolated.
Yeah, it's a bit different from other communist countries, wasn't it? It wasn't as isolated as some of the others. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually quite different. You could travel freely, and there was exchange.
My parents went on holiday there in the 70s or something. You know, they couldn't do that in Romania or Czech even. I don't think.
Yeah. So there was established Buddhist center, and I went there. And my first kind of like test was that people who practiced this stuff for 20 years were all looking great and were normal, healthy people. They weren't like, strange.
Okay, so you thought they're healthy. This is a good sign.
Yeah, with a sense of humor, and I think back then also I was impressed with women who were in their 40s, 50s, and they looked amazing. And I thought, this is something I want to practice. It
does. Yeah, there's the way in which the fruits speak for a practice, doesn't it? I remember going to an Aikido dojo and going, wow, there's 60-year-old guys throwing people around. Or you go to a yoga festival, like, how old are you? And it's kind of a surprise when you find out.
That was my motivation. I saw these women and I wanted to be like them when I grow up.
Okay, because there is this Eastern European thing, and tell me if this resonates culturally, that sort of, and it's all over the world, but I think particularly in Eastern Europe, that past a certain age, you're done. You're past your sell by day. My wife's parents thought she was very old to be getting married at 28, and they sort of looked me in the eye and said, thank you so much for taking such an old girl, And I was like, it's fine. So there is that image, isn't there, of sort of women being past the sell by day.
Yeah, I mean, in my generation, not anymore. But in the generation of my parents, when I compare my parents with the same people in Germany, same age, it's kind of, I get really sad because their health and physical fitness level is way below. But that also has to do with the trauma of war, and I think Europe had.
It's hard on your body. It's hard on your whole body mind, isn't it?
Yeah. So, but still, there is also people who are in a good shape, even in their 60s, in East Europe and in Croatia.
Of course. So you saw these healthy people and you thought, okay, there's something in this.
Mm-hmm. And also I had, the way yoga was practiced and taught there was always, yoga and meditation were one thing. It wasn't like yoga wasn't just physical, it was holistic. It was the teaching, it was the philosophy. And people from the Buddhist center, there was a lot of people who studied Sanskrit, and there was genuine philosophical background to what was taught, because Yugoslavia also had good connections through non-aligned movement. I don't know if you know much about it, but connections with India, and there were scholars of Sanskrit, very good cathedral, department in the university. So, I started by reading Upanishads and Rig Veda and stuff like that, because that's how you start learning yoga. It's not just...
Yeah. So that might be surprising, and I know people listen to this from different backgrounds, and some people might be very immersed in this. Others might be thinking, I thought yoga was downwards dog and stretching and, standing on one leg. And they might be surprised to learn that, yoga has been presented many times in history. The asanas were just a small part of it.
Definitely. Hatha yoga was a minor sect, 18th century sect that kind of practiced by weirdos, basically. Mm-hmm. Today, it's becoming physical. It's so much physical in the West due to how it was transmitted to the West. Teachers who first started to come to the West took this physical part, which was resonating with Westerners the most. But first, actually, Vivekananda, when he was coming to United States, end of 19th century, he didn't mention Hatha Yoga at all. Hatha Yoga was not part of his program because it didn't fit into colonial politics. English colonials didn't like Hatha Yoga. Kind of like bandits on the road who,
Yeah, there was some difficult associations, wasn't there, to do with either criminality or independence movement, and
to be removed from Vivekananda's teaching.
So it's interesting that it's you have to say yoga and meditation as a separate thing now. I'm a yoga and meditation teacher. You need to add that, as opposed to just I'm a modern postural yoga teacher. I do flexibility type stuff with a bit of mindfulness maybe thrown in. We've talked with other guests on the podcast about how the changes in modern yoga and how it's become increasingly sort of orientated around performance and extreme shapes and sexiness, athleticism. There's been a whole Western yoga that's developed, which has not so much stressed the meditative sides.
Yeah, but there are still also other things.
There's lots out there. It's a big world, isn't it? It's a big world. There's plenty there.
There's a lot of crappy music and there's some good music.
Okay, so you just got to shift through it. And there's also that argument of the sort of what I call the gateway drug theory, that people come to it because they maybe want to stay young, like you were talking about, or want to get slim or whatever, and then they realize there's more to it and they find the sort of deeper teachers.
Exactly. I mean, any motivation is good to start. And I have students who are doing teacher training with me who started Bikram yoga and got attracted to this heat. And
yeah.
But then after some time, they realize there must be something behind more.
Yeah.
Any entrance gate is okay. But I think what's important is that there are still teachings or yoga schools that offer yoga in its full potential.
Yeah.
Have that chance to develop further if they want.
Yeah, I used to be very negative about modern yoga and very critical of it. And then a few things happened, and I realized that, like, you can go through that, as you say, gateway in there. And I know it can be quite painful for some of the more established teachers or teachers working with a deeper approach, can we say, to see how yoga is presented often in the modern world. There's, a yoga celebrity show on American TV right now, and they're
but what bothers me about it is that we're all talking about it and sharing it.
Yeah, right. Everyone's saying, "Oh, isn't this awful?" And I
job for them.
Great publicity. Donald Trump got elected on that same method. But my response mostly these days, I went for a period of being very critical, is these days I mostly just put what I do out there and say, well, this is what I offer and it might be helpful to people.
Yeah, I realized also, I relaxed and I realized I'm not for everyone.
Yeah.
People will find what I put.
There's a niche, right? Everyone has a niche, and if you want to get bendy, that's not really what I do. I do kind of yoga off the mat. That's my thing, getting yoga off the mat with embodied yoga principles. Like, what's your niche? If someone said, well, who are you for? Which people should come to see you?
People who are skeptical, also critical thinkers, educated, open to resonate with Buddhism, not necessarily Buddhist, but resonate with that teaching. Somehow they're touched by something in the teaching, and with a sense of humor.
Okay, that's important. Now, yoga and meditation, I noticed these are often still put together. But what's interesting is Hatha yoga doesn't come from a Buddhist background, right? I mean, I know in India there's always been interplay and conversation, but the idea of yoga being a Buddhist thing, like I do yoga at the Buddhist Center in Brighton, that's fairly recent, isn't it? And I mean, you're doing Zen meditation, which is Japanese, so it's different again.
Yeah, I don't see it as different at all. I mean,
just historically.
Yeah, historically, Hatha yoga has a Hinduist background, although Hinduisms were a response to certain movements of Buddhism and Jaivism. And if you go into history, what we know today as Hinduism is a process of becoming.
It's quite a big, I don't know much about it, so I'm sorry if I'm ignorant here, but it's not just one Hinduism, right, any more than there's one yoga.
Exactly. And also Patanjali, who is now interpreted almost as a Bible of yoga. Because
the famous Patanjali, the saint, the founding father of yoga, right?
Yeah, this is what Westerners did out of one book, turn it into a Bible, and it's just one book, a manual. There's much more, also many more texts. But however, Patanjali was influenced by Buddhist Eightfold Noble Path, and if you go into secular scientific research, and this is where I kind of draw my resources, and then the picture becomes a bit different. And I think also it's this Western need to compartmentalize everything and to say this can be like that, this cannot be like that. Indian thought is not so exclusive. It's kind of like
Yeah, I remember being at what was a Buddhist temple in India, and they said, well, actually, there was actually 3 schools of Buddhism just in this one temple. It was all sort of mixed up, and that seems to be the way it was.
Yeah, one family member can be Hindu, another one Buddhist, and no way that someone would kind of judge anyone for choosing their own path or religion.
So what drew you to studying Buddhism then? What was the start there?
Beside pain and confusion. isn't that obvious?
That's enough. I'm just curious at what point you got kind of more into it. When did you start studying Zen, for example?
I started to practice yoga because a friend of mine suggested, you should check this teacher out. And I knew her from studying music. And after I came back from London, I saw that she visibly changed. Somehow she was more together and calm. So I saw that it had a good effect on her. And then I wanted to try it out. And after a couple of months of practicing, I went to a first longer 3-day seminar where I met my teacher Žarko, who runs a Buddhist center and is a meditation teacher. And 3 days of practice, that got me. I was like, okay, that's it. Because I felt relief inside that I haven't felt never. And I saw that I could reach there without any kind of outer, it's just all in me. Breath, body, I have all the tools I need. I don't need anything from outside of myself.
And you're the first Zen practitioner we've had on the podcast. And some people, again, maybe very well versed in Zen. Some people may have just heard it's a very fashionable word. I was walking by like Zen bar the other day, and it's Zen soap and Zen's this and, Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance, Zen and blah, blah, blah. So first of all, what school is it? It was like a Rinzai school or what?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it's Chan. It's a Chinese.
Oh, it's a Chinese version.
Yeah, it's a Chinese version. And the word Chan or the word Zen has a root in Sanskrit word jhana, which means meditation. So it's a Buddhist school that has an emphasis on meditation.
So Zen meditation means meditation.
Meditation.
And I've only studied a little bit of Zen. The Zen that I've seen was Japanese and was sort of quite strict, quite formal. Had this sort of almost militaristic feel, but also had kind of a sense of humor with it. That's what I liked about it. It was a mixture of sort of warrior and jester archetypes.
Well, Chan is a bit more relaxed.
A bit more chill. Okay.
Yeah. But still, all the elements are there. And the same school is also, you'll find it in Vietnam. For instance, Thich Nhat Hanh is the same school. It's called Tang there, and in Korea. So it's that line of thought and spiritual inquiry that started with Bodhidharma, the founder of martial arts as well, transmitting it from India to China, coming to Shaolin Temple, or actually first sitting in front of the wall in a cave, as the myth or story goes. And I don't know how much now you want to hear about the whole historical transmission.
Well, I think people be interested in what's the sort of flavor of it. I mean, in terms of Zen, seems to have an emphasis on practice and realization and waking up yourself, and not so much philosophical side of things. I know Zen sometimes has these koans and riddles and things as well.
So I think maybe it's interesting then to talk about a bit how actually Zen or Chan came from India to China. Because in India, it was culturally accepted that holy people go to woods and meditate and then go around and beg for food, and people would feed them. That was a norm, to feed the holy people. But when Buddhism came to China, in China, if you're begging around, you're just a beggar and you're not a holy person. So the whole structure had to reorganize itself, and monks and nuns had to start providing their own food. There was no more time to sit around or to sit in meditation. They had to work. So the daily activities became the practice. The chopping woods, gardening, building, sewing. It became a field for meditation. And that's the essence. That's the flavor, the main flavor of Zen and Chan, that there is formal practice, sitting meditation, but then all your daily activities are also your practice if you put your mind into it that way. And I find that really resonates with Western lifestyle. I don't see myself ever going to become a nun, but I see myself as a dedicated practitioner in these circumstances. And also I think in our day of age, we need to stay in the city, on the market, and kind of work with what we, where we are. Not in the
We're not monastics, are we? It's a householder path that the vast majority of people are on that are interested in these things.
I mean, both in Chinese Chanzen there are monastics and there is value to that, but I think now with the Chan and Buddhism coming to West, and this is just beginning of transition. It's maybe 300-400 years for Buddhism to take its Western face. I see it more being an active lifestyle.
And how does the body fit into all this then? Because I mean, obviously we're not really a meditation podcast particularly, but the body is a central focus here. Someone said, what's the role of the body in Zen? What would you say?
Yeah, well, everything starts with the body. If you're without the body, where is the mind if not in the body? And if you go into texts, Satipatthana Sutra on mindfulness, first foundation of mindfulness is the body in standing, sitting, lying down, and walking. And this is basically what I teach through my yoga classes. Mindfulness of the body, and sitting, standing, lying down, and then moving in different asanas.
Yeah, they're the postures of life, aren't they? I like to teach warrior posture on a chair, warrior posture through a walking, warrior posture through standing. And this is the way we live life.
If we learn how to stand and sit well, we already, that's 90% of the work. Yeah. Everything starts in the body, and then to approach the body through this Buddhist perspective of the body is not to seek something beyond the body, not to look for something in the body for something beyond it, but to really actually see the body as it is. And this is called suchness. And I really appreciate that approach. There is no need to transcend the body, to purify the body. The body is such, and let's see what that such is moment to moment.
And what would that be like for someone listening to this podcast? Maybe they're, sitting on the New York subway, or they're driving their car through London or Berlin, or they're walking along the street in Paris. What would that mean to them?
Okay, let's choose one situation. For instance, you're walking through the streets of the city, and first thing would be to drop into that contact of the feet with the ground, and to simply let your mind stay on that rhythm of the walking and shifting the weight, and not needing to add anything or deduct anything from that experience. And then you can, from that ground, you can spread your awareness throughout the whole body, and being aware of the whole body walking. Inevitably, there will be moments where your mind shifts to something else, and usually we go into thoughts about either two directions, either past or future. You find yourself fantasizing or worrying about the future, or somehow dwelling in the past. So the moment you notice that, you come back to your feet and you continue walking. Not worrying about the arrival point, because sometimes or very often we walk and we keep carrying in mind the goal, like I need to arrive there.
Yeah.
As if we would forget where we're going if we stop repeating that in our mind. But kind of making each step the goal. And that would be the Zen practice of walking, meditation in the city. There's also approach to, once you get into the body walking, you can open yourself to all the sounds that are surrounding. So your whole surrounding becomes the field of the practice. Usually what we do, we constantly like and dislike things. I like this sound, I like the bird sound, but I don't like the car. And then to stop disliking and start listening everything as the music of the city, which is kind of...
That links to your main themes, doesn't it? So that's kind of open attention. So, one walking meditation is really no different whether you're in the city or whether you're in a Zen temple, right? It's still bringing the attention back to the body, noticing when the mind drifts, returning to the present sensations. And you can do it in a more focused way, like concentration practice, or a more open awareness kind of way of just noticing everything that is arising in all the different senses. And I like this frame of, as music, it's sound, right? It's sound. Yeah. Okay, there's a sound, there's another sound.
Not making hierarchies in what you perceive. I like this, I don't like that, this is better, this is worse.
And how do you do that? Because isn't it the most, second foundation of mindfulness, most natural thing in the world to be like this, don't like that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, but then the practice is to notice when you pick it up and to simply drop that line of thinking and come back to the whole picture.
Nice. Okay, so a couple of things people can try when they're listening to this: just the present moment awareness, straightforward mindfulness, or that more open practice. I quite like mindfulness of sound, and I think it's not taught very much. Generally, it's mindfulness of the body. Obviously, it's our theme here, or thinking, perhaps, thoughts. But what I like about mindfulness of sound is it kind of expands my awareness in a sort of fairly radiant kind of way, because it's about listening all around oneself.
Yeah, it's about listening and practicing inner silence. So Zen is also famous for its emphasis on silence. But what is actually silence? It's not that we have to be in a soundproof room or somehow shut our thoughts innerly and become zombies. But that inner silence means not responding to what's coming your way. So you open yourself to all the sounds and they kind of flow through you without you having to respond. And response is usually this: I like this, I don't like that, getting caught into what you hear.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So become a field for all the sounds to happen, and staying innerly silent. And I think that's also excellent way to deal with stress of urban living. I mean, we all live in a pretty loud.
You're being non-reactive to this loud. And again, can I ask you a little bit on the method? So how do you do that? I mean, I can't just become non-reactive just by telling myself to do that.
Mm-hmm. It's not that the practice is to notice when you become reactive.
Yeah.
And then to come back to your feet, spread the awareness in the whole body, and come back to this home of the body and continue listening. Like, it's a bit like if you're taking a picture and then you can zoom into a certain detail, or you can have a panoramic view. So what you do with being non-reactive is that you stay with this panoramic view. And inevitably, the mind will get caught into details. But that's not a mistake. I think this is something that people don't understand with meditation often, that it's okay to find yourself being somewhere else. That's the moment of victory, when you realize, I'm in the future, I'm in the past. Because the moment you realize that, it's a moment of little awakening, you realize. And then you come back to...
Yeah. I always encourage students to congratulate themselves for coming back to the moment rather than to beat themselves up for, it's like, and if you were really gone, you wouldn't have noticed it, right? So, if you're noticing the fact that you're gone, congratulations, you're meditating.
And that can be discouraging at the beginning, because you start noticing, when you start practicing meditation, you start noticing, and then you think like you're doing worse than you did before. But it's just that you're the same. It's just that you didn't notice it.
I think that's the same in a lot of embodied practices. Like say you're studying posture, you might start noticing how much you slump, or you might start noticing how much you breathe with your chest rather than your belly. Or I've been working with food quite a lot recently. I've got, God, the number of times I'm eating emotionally rather than eating because I'm hungry. And it's like, wow, have I got worse? And I haven't got worse. Of course, I've just got conscious incompetence rather than unconscious incompetence, which is the first stage of learning. And I think it's why students, whatever the embodied art, need a lot of encouragement in the early stages, because you're realizing how much you're not doing some of these things.
Yeah, and also I think with the attitude of having to be perfect, somehow that we have to be perfect immediately at meditation, it puts so much pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, isn't it? Like I have people say to me, "Oh, I tried meditating once, but I couldn't empty my mind." And I'm like, "Well, then you're alive. Well done. You're not enlightened, all right." And and they tried it once, and they some ridiculously awful teacher told them they had to empty their mind, which of course you're not going to do, particularly if you're a complete beginner.
But he has emptied his mind. Well, I tell my students when I teach Introduction to Meditation course, first thing I say, like, I can guarantee you will be unsuccessful in this. And that's fine.
Takes the pressure off.
Yeah, it takes the pressure off. Yeah.
And so let's talk about this perfectionism, because, in music, I've seen perfectionism. I have musician friends who spend 3 hours every morning practicing scales, for example.
Just 3 hours?
Sorry. Is that? I'll tell them they're slacking off. I'll tell them they need some more German work ethic going on there. You've been in Germany and New York, actually. There's two places with hardcore work ethics, right? Culturally. I know it's a stereotype, but there's some truth in it. So, they're practicing hard. There's a risk of perfectionism in that. I've seen that both in Zen and in music. And I've seen it in yoga teachers too, that risk of trying to be perfect and just beating themselves up with excessive practice, meditate 20 hours a day and play the music, the flute 20 hours a day or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So let's speak a little bit about perfectionism a bit more, because I think that's a juicy topic for a lot of listeners, no matter what their art of choices?
You know what Zen says? There, I've read it somewhere. I don't know the exact source. 80% is perfect. And that's my motto. So, 80% is perfect. And my shiatsu teacher also would say, like, you forget 80%, but then 20% that stays is what you need. I totally agree. Especially classical music is about reaching some kind of perfection, or rather reaching excellence. And I think that's the difference. Yeah. Like, find that switch where you're not seeking for perfection, but seeking for excellence. And for excellence in things. I like to see people doing their job on the level of excellency.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's another mistake someone can make, or perhaps another way someone could be unkind to himself is there's a certain cultural tradition of kind of postmodernism, which you'll find in Germany and England and, less in Eastern Europe, but you'll still find, which is sort of like, no one's better than anyone else. It's not about being excellent. We're all equal. And I would challenge that. I'd say, in music, that's obviously false, right? There's obviously people who are at a philharmonic level and people who aren't. Yeah. And I wonder if we need a bit more of that in meditation and yoga teaching. I remember when I first brought in exam criteria to my students on one of my embodiment courses, some people were like, well, you can't examine that. And I said, well, no, you can. Some people are better than others, and we need to give them feedback so they can improve.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I do have exam at my teacher training. It's real exam.
So what is excellence to you as a yoga teacher? Because I think it's dishonest to say we don't have some idea of this, because you can go to a yoga class and, okay, that was really bad. And you can go to another yoga class and it's not just a matter of taste or different people like different things, which is true on another level. There's a way in which some teachers are just world class. I remember I was in one in Tri Yoga, and it was a very experienced hatha yoga teacher. And it was, the experience was like being flown first class. And I went afterwards, I said, wow, this guy's really good. And there is quality as well as, we might say, taste. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what makes a high quality yoga teacher?
That's a good question. Let me think about it. Ability to multitask.
Okay, so like tracking different things.
Tracking so many different things at once.
Kind of ironic.
Yeah. While staying in your body, still while staying in your belly. For me, it's the belly, like where I always find the grounding. So
you're feeling yourself, but simultaneously you're noticing the time, you're noticing if students are doing something dangerous, you're noticing their anxiety or their breathing patterns, you're tracking all these different things.
Yeah, so you're kind of tracking innerly and outwardly what's going on.
Yeah, dual awareness, yeah.
Then also ability to improvise. If you stick to your concept and just stick to your concept, it will be dry. It might be a perfect concept, but not responding to the situation.
Yeah, boom. That's when I know my students have really got it, is that we had an exercise recently, just a few days ago, where students were given 10 minutes to come up with it, and they were given an object, like a ball or a ring or whatever, and said, right, you've got 10 minutes to invent an embodiment exercise using this. And the difference between the beginner ones and the senior ones was the senior ones were like, yeah, no problem. They were able to creatively respond to that, right? Whereas the beginners were just like, what? But what do we do? They needed those basics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've also learned that for beginners, it's good to give them something like a form, because people are lost if they don't have it.
Yeah, it's helpful, isn't it? Yeah.
Mastery comes later, with experience, with doing it, with making mistakes, with thinking about what you could have done better. So talking about what makes a good yoga teacher is this reflection of what was good, what could have been done differently.
That is often missed, isn't it? In martial arts or yoga or many disciplines, there's the practice, like, I know people that practice like demons, but in corporate work, we talk about the learning cycle, and reflection is part of that learning cycle before rest. And I think that's often missed. Like, how many times has a yoga teacher, sat and reflected afterwards with another yoga teacher that maybe was in the class and said, okay, what could I have improved? What was good? What wasn't so good? What could I do differently next time? Like, there's often not space for that reflection, or it's somehow not really encouraged somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, I encourage that. I tell to my students, like, there is always a class that you plan to teach, a class that you teach, and then a class you could have taught. So to have that analytical process.
Got it. So what do you, because it's worth planning still, right? You plan, no plan survives the battlefield, one general said. And then there's the spontaneity of what happens and arises. We've had we've had two improvisers on the podcast. One is a comedian and one is like a theatre improviser. And they talked about the sort of things, this is Rachel and Adam, if you've heard the podcast already, and they're kind of what's arising spontaneously. And then there's afterwards, okay, what could I have done?
Yeah. It's the level of creativity then with master teachers. And I see in my classes, I love to improvise, and it comes from my musical background because I was also doing a lot of free improvisation. And then for me, there is this sentence of, oh no, I forgot his name, famous jazz player who said, fear no mistakes.
Miles
Davis, yes. So if you go around mistakes, if you make them into a tune, then it's working. And that's fun for me, of course.
They're birds now. And there's a painter, you know, every mistake's a bird, you know, and there's in Aikido, we always say, oh, it's a variation technique, you know. And I say to my students, look, it's okay to make a mistake, but then don't try and stop and go back. You know, if someone's goes left instead of right, it's like, okay, well, what technique's on the left? You know, let's go with that.
And that flow, finding the way to flow with the things, just like in life, hopefully. Another thing that makes an excellent yoga teacher is that you teach from the beginning. You meet someone from the way you greet someone on the door to the way you say goodbye. It's not just what you say in the classroom.
Nice. It's the whole. I remember this yoga teacher I mentioned in London. He learned everyone's name at the beginning of class, before the class. And there's like 30, 40 people in the class. You've got everyone's names. And I was like, wow. Introduce. I'm very bad with names, but this guy, you know, I mean, I always introduce myself. I always sit up for my yoga mat. I jump, you know, I walk up to the new person. I shake their hand, say hello, welcome. You know, I touch that, you know, shake their hand, and say, what's your name? What have you come for? And, you know, that, to me, that sort of getting an idea of why people are in class is often missed as well. It seems like that's just, for me, another thing where I see excellence in yoga is the teacher's very clear on the purpose of what they're doing and aligning that with what the student wants.
That's well said. Yes, you're clear about your purpose, but you're not pushing into someone's face. You kind of offer, and then people take it on the level where they're ready, where they want to take.
What else? Anything else that makes for excellence? What would be the classical philharmonic of the yoga world?
I mean, for me, it's always the sense of humor, being able to, to embrace the situations with humor. That wins me over. In Philharmonic, I was recently at one concert, Isabel Faust, she plays violin, she was playing with a cello player, and talking about excellence and in the postmodernist view on everyone being an artist. No, you need to really practice since you're a child for hours, and you need to be obsessed with the music and the instrument to get to that level where you perform sonatas.
Yeah, I mean, it's to be really good at anything that has any depth to it. You know, there's the sort of the Gladwell 10,000 hours thing, and some people question that and say, yeah, you can do it less if you have really good feedback and things like that. But it's still, you know, 5,000, not 10,000. And you know, I think
you need to be obsessed with it.
He says love comes first.
Yeah.
Right. You love something, so you do it a lot. And I'm never worried when my students if they love it and they're getting feedback, those two criteria, there's some checks and balances. Like I never worry about them, even if they're at quite a low level. And the only ones I worry about are the ones that aren't getting the feedback, the checks and balances, or they're sort of half-hearted about it. And they're like, okay, you're just not going to practice. And I wonder if a lot of what we're doing in a class setting is inspiring people just to do their own practice, to catch the bug, you know, to catch the, you say bug there in Germany, like the germs, you know, to catch the virus.
Germans are funny with bugs in Germans, but
are they? Is this a big thing there? So maybe we had Alexandra Vilvaskaya from Russia, and her and I had this great conversation on the podcast about culture. Now you lived in the United States, Croatia, Germany. You spent a year in England, I think you heard you say earlier. Mm-hmm. So I mean, you must have seen some of this stuff cross-culturally. What are your observations there?
Well, you know, I'm now. I live among a totally international circle in Berlin. So I myself feel now one of those uprooted people who are floating around and with the longing for home. But yeah, where is it? I don't know. Little things that are important is to figure out in which culture you should hug and which culture you should just shake. And twice and where do you kiss once?
You make sure your classes start on time. I was aware I was 2 minutes late for you on the way on this call, and I was thinking, oh God, is she Croatian or German now?
I'm more German now.
Oh, I apologize then.
Yeah. Yeah, so things like that where you don't want to offend people. So you try to kind of all the time figure out what's the norm.
And do you think that shows up in embodiment practices at all? You know, there's a way in which sort of French Aikido, for example, now it depends on the school and the teacher, and people are I can already see people writing angry emails about generalization. But there is a way in which French Aikido is often quite aesthetic. It's how you might imagine French Aikido to be. And I wonder if yoga will develop in different countries. You know, we often have a lot of sort of Californian type influence in embodied mind arts. And I wonder if there won't, you know, if German, I did some yoga in Switzerland and it was Iyengar yoga in Switzerland. And it was like a watch being made. There was a very preciseness to it. And obviously there's different schools and different personalities. So, you know, it's difficult to generalize, but I wonder if over time embodied arts won't be influenced by the countries they're in. Maybe Berlin's a bit different because it's so international. It's pretty mixed up there, isn't it?
I wish there is more diversity of influences. I think we're all kind of influenced by mainstream American yoga, coming with this huge, powerful machine that's
they're good at marketing.
Yeah, and also they have money, so to invest in it. So we're all, or at least in Germany, it's kind of the strongest, the loudest voice. And then there are, of course, grassroots projects and people who are doing their thing for 30, 40 years. And I wish there is more voices. There are more. Yeah,
people in churches and little English old ladies doing yoga for 30 years.
I love that. I mean, that's also yoga. And that's also meaningful for society, for family, for them, and these kind of things are
I've been trying to get some European voices on the podcast because what I realized was a lot of the podcast space is pretty American influenced, you know, and that's not to badmouth Americans. It's often because there's a strong work ethic and strong sense of putting things out there in the world, and sometimes a sort of ability to brand things. You know, I think the English are less good at that, for example. And in this podcast, my intention is to have at least 50% of the guests to be non-American. And it's certainly over that at the moment. I've nothing against Americans. I have American guests on. I've had one already. I've got more booked. But I want to have some European voices in there. As you say, it's about diversity of influence. And people often talk about diversity in terms of maybe skin color or something like that. But it also is diversity of ideas. It's diversity of cultures. It's, you know, is the yoga festival every single person teaching from the United States? And I've literally seen that, like all the headliners, as it were. And I want to know what's going on in Germany. You know what I mean? Like it's closer than California. I'm curious what the scene is in Berlin. I'm curious about French Aikido, you know, and it's somehow it's either Asians or Americans, you know?
Well, my roots are in Croatia. So I can tell you about my experience coming from Croatia to New York and then going to New York studios. And of course, I was like, I want to try everything. I want to see what's New York yoga scene. Then coming to my first yoga class, hot vinyasa with music, I was shocked because I never practiced yoga with music before. And suddenly rock tunes and everyone looked totally hip, and I received some hands-on assistance that took me to a higher level of, I don't know.
Some unwanted, unasked for hands-on, probably.
And my first reaction, I felt like, wow, I'm so provincial. I've been practicing for 10 years in this small country, and like, wow. And it took me time to get over that feeling. Maybe that's because I'm really from a small country, but maybe that's also the European feeling. Like,
it can bring up insecurity, can't it? Like, I remember I had 2 yoga teachers in my house for tea once. Well, one of them was from Canada and she was teaching a seminar here on trauma, and the other was a friend of mine from London who was a well-known yoga teacher there. And the Canadian was like if it was West Coast Canadian, so sort of Californian type, perfect teeth, shiny, perfect hair. Actually, she knew loads, so there's no way I'm bad-mouthing this person. She was very knowledgeable, but there was a sort of shine and outwards glow to her that my London yoga teacher friend just didn't have. And
it's ingrained in the education system. I mean, I learned a lot from American yoga teachers. I love New York scene, and I love New York. It's great. But in my growing up in educational system, it wasn't cool to talk about yourself.
Yeah. Americans will put themselves forwards in a way often, which is just not allowed. You know, I was just in Holland. In Holland, they say tall poppies get cut down.
Mm.
It's pretty harsh. You know, you don't want to stand out.
Yeah, and also there is a culture of like doubting and questioning everything from where I come from. So, of course.
Speak about that. What about the cynicism? Because the British and most of my Slavic friends, you know, I've got a lot of friends in Slavic countries, Poland, Ukraine.
They probably love Monty Python.
They do, because it's skeptical, but also there's a cynicism. Do you know what I'm talking about? There's like that slightly dark. The Serbians definitely have it. Some of the Croatians have it mixed with the Italian, maybe. But there's that slightly dark, cynical vibe, which it isn't the same as like, hey, everything's going to be great. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, life is hard, and slightly, you were talking about skepticism earlier. That's a pretty cultural thing, I think.
For instance, on my teacher training, when I start to talk about alignment of the body, I can't help myself, but I start with like, first thing to know about the body is that it's going to die.
Dark. a mixture of Zen Buddhism and Slavic roots. They're in trouble.
And then I can see who has a sense of humor. Some people laugh, some people are like, yeah, it's that type of thing, a bit dark but warm, I would say also.
It's an interesting combination, isn't it? People don't always get. Yeah, I'm aware of the sort of warmth of many of those countries. I'll be teaching in Croatia at some point, I think, next year, so it'd be good to be back there.
Wow. Where about?
Probably in Zagreb. There's someone there that got interested in my work. I taught some life coaches out there once. I've Embodiment's life coaches. That was good. I haven't taught yoga teachers there though before. So it seems that Eastern Europe's really developed though. Like I was just in Romania a couple of weeks ago, and things have changed. You know, like people. It's not just like one teacher doing a bit of Iyengar yoga. You know, they had hot studios and. There was, you know, the studio I was in was from hot pod yoga or something like that. It seems like Eastern Europe has really developed in terms of the yoga scene and a little bit more of this kind of more commercial type yoga.
It's a new market. Yeah. No, I also see that in Croatia, and yeah, it's interesting to see how it's.
And the younger generation are very different, right, in terms of attitude and exposure, sort of yoga influences and things.
Mm. What sometimes saddens me when I see so many young women coming, mostly it's women coming to yoga, and then this yoga culture starting to perpetuate the same things that they get anywhere else, like having to look good in yoga tights, having to perform perfectly, all this kind of self.
And this is earlier you said, you know, any gateway is a good gateway. And I almost challenged you, but I thought it was too early in the conversation. And, you know, I wonder if if there are gateways that are sort of unhealthy enough that maybe they're not okay.
Yeah, this is I wonder about that, because it's like yoga is becoming a branded movement. There is one way, this is yoga and this is not yoga, with this whole strong influence of certain yoga brands, and then people come to me wondering if this is this yoga? What kind of yoga is this? And I'm the teacher, and they're maybe doing yoga for 1 year and like wondering if what I'm doing is yoga.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to that. I kind of came into yoga as a bit of an outsider from the martial arts, though I'd done 20 years of yoga, but I wasn't from that a normal yoga lineage, you know, like Iyengar or Ashtanga or something. And a lot of people really were questioning it, and some loved it. They were like, wow, fresh approach, something creative. And then there's other people who are kind of like, well, this isn't yoga. And I'm like, okay, if you want to say that, that's cool. And I think you can kind of go to different directions on this kind of. There can be the reactionary old-fashioned yoga has to be this, like it's been around for thousands of years that way, even though it hasn't. And then there can be the opposite, you know, saying, I don't know, aerobics with a dog is yoga, you know, doga or something like that. You know, it's kind of.
There's beer yoga in Berlin.
Beer yoga, right. So at what point do you say, okay, that's antithetical, is that the word? That's fundamentally against, because I've had traditional yoga teachers say, Mark, your form is quite different. It's quite unusual, but actually it's about union. It's about mindfulness. It is about integration. So, you know, the ethics are integrated. So, okay, I would call that yoga, even though you're a weird yoga teacher. And there's other things which look like downwards dog, but maybe the ethics isn't integrated or the mindfulness isn't a key aspect. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because I don't want to be sort of like, you're not yoga. It can get very finger pointing, very puritanical, like you have to be pure. Or you can get very just too open and just like, getting drunk with your dog is yoga.
Yeah. Well, I would say that I would agree with this first line of teachers. It's not about the form, but what you do within the form, the essence or well, it's not about the form, but the experience within the form.
Yeah. And
I wanted to say something else now, but now I forgot. I lost it.
It's okay. We'll come back to it maybe. Yeah. So we've got form, obviously Zen deals with that as well. This idea of form versus essence, doesn't it? In terms of Zen. And I know Zen teachers can be quite hard on form.
Yeah. There is this sitting meditation form that in essence, it is like, for me, that's one posture that there is for yoga. You don't need to do anything else. Basically, everything else that you do prepares the body for the sitting. So,
yeah, that's one traditional view of yoga, isn't it? That it's about preparation of the body for sitting. I know even you talked about Patanjali earlier. He only has one line on asana, I believe, in the Yoga Sutra.
It's all about sitting. It's Padmasana. There is no other. We talk about Patanjali, but and that sitting form is not reached by endless analysis of anatomy either. You won't get there by aligning your shoulders and head and ear. You have
anatomy's got really cool, hasn't it? It's got really fashionable. I just posted a question about I have a slightly anterior rotated pelvis, and I'm looking at this and I don't like the aesthetic of it, and there's potentially some impacts there. And I put it on the Yoga Movement Research Group, which is a great little group, and the responses I got were in such anatomical jargon. People were like, oh, your lower back line and this and that. And I'm someone that has some anatomy training, but I understood less than 50% of the responses.
Yeah, I like that group too, by the way. And
yeah, it's a good group.
This emphasis on anatomy, it's a way to control the body, to preserve the sense of control over the body. It's still the mind controlling the body. And it's useful, and we need to know it as teachers and use it as a resource, but it's not the end point.
Yeah, it makes you sound very professional as well, doesn't it? When you say the iliac crest has an anterior tilt, as opposed to like your hips are forwards or whatever. It sort of gives that air of like doctor-like professionalism.
Exactly. And yoga teachers love to sound scientific because it's a way of kind of like valid.
I wonder if there's an insecurity under that. Like there's, and Iyengar, I think, was the first to do this. There's some real bullshit science in his books, absolutely terrible books that are often put on teacher training lists. Just there's things in them are just not true scientifically. And I wonder if there was a sort of insecurity and an attempt to get Western validation, rather than saying, actually, what we do is really good on its own terms. It doesn't need to have this. And I'm not against some anatomy training. It's useful to know certain things. And there's embodied anatomy like Amy Matthews and, different people that do very good stuff. But I wonder if there's not that insecurity at the heart of that.
Yeah. And on the other hand, Western is doing the same with adding some chanting and gods and goddesses to practices that also...
They're the two ways, right? You either stick feathers up your ass to pretend you're a chicken, or you stick a lab coat on a chicken and pretend it's a scientist. It's kind of, that's a Zen saying, isn't it? The chicken ass Zen one. That's one of my favorite. I got it from Fight Club, but I believe it's a Zen saying originally.
Can you say it once again?
The original saying, I believe, is from Japanese Rinzai Zen, which is very fierce. I had a Rinzai Zen. Sticking feathers up your ass does not make you a chicken.
I haven't heard.
You haven't heard? Oh, it's a good one for. I really had this. I was in Russia once, and it was more obvious when I went to a yoga studio in Russia, and I saw Russians dressing up as Indians, and they were playing a sitar, and there was Indian food, and people were speaking Sanskrit. It was more obvious to me in Russia than when I saw English people do it. But then I thought, it's just as silly. It's just as silly and inauthentic. It doesn't matter what country you're from, if it's this impersonation of the culture rather than the trying to get to the root of what the teachers were interested in.
Going back then to Bodhidharma and Chan, there is this koan. What did Bodhidharma brought to China? Like, what is it that he transmitted from India? Yeah. And the answer is nothing that wasn't already there. It's just that you need the methods and kind of like teaching to bring that to the awareness. So this is how I also see the practice of yoga. inherent in all of the human beings everywhere, this state of union. It's not something that we have to invent, it's there. And now it's about having techniques, methods, teachings, how to get there or back there.
Nice. So 2 things to wrap up. One would be, what's your kind of message about the body to the world that you want to put out there? And before we do that, maybe where can people find out more about you? Is there websites? I've got zenyoga-berlin.de in front of me. Is there any others?
That's the website. And
that's
then there's
a nice website.
SoundCloud channel where I put on some guided meditations. And also I'm on Insights Timer with guided meditations. But the website is a good place to start.
I'll link to the website, which is a nice mixture of Zen purity and German organization. It's a nice website. And feel free to send me any links. Sorry, what was that?
I did it myself, by the way.
It's nice. Good job. And I was a bit confused. You're blonder here, though. That's the only thing that confused me. But yeah, feel free to send me any other links, like the SoundCloud links, and I'll put that. Make sure those on. Sure. Okay, this has been fun. It's nice getting to know you rather than just as a Facebook face. Yeah. So what's your sort of final message for people in terms of about the body?
Stand on your 2 feet and relax.
Nice. Keep it simple. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embody Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.